Podcasting is more than just talking. It's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
You know him from Temptation Island. You also seen him on Antique Roadshow. All-around good guy. I've actually met Mark Walberg. No, not that Mark Walberg. The real Mark Walberg. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and it's nice to be introduced as the real Mark Wahlberg. It's all relative, I guess, isn't it?
Well, you're older than him, right?
I am absolutely. Well, let's just say the original. On Antiques Roadshow, we're always looking for the original, so there you go.
So how does somebody go about getting a job as the host of Antique Roadshow?
Well, and boy, if I don't correct you, you're going to yell at me, so it's Antiques Roadshow, which was one of the first lessons I had to learn when I got the job. You know, I had been a broadcaster my whole career. I'd done all sorts of reality shows and game shows and stuff, and Antiques Roadshow had been on the air for years, and they needed a new host because Lara Spencer was pregnant and leaving the show. And I got a call from my agent saying they're interested in talking to you, and I really thought I was being punked because I had done some crazy reality shows and I had no background in antiques. But so the story goes that I sent in my tape, or they sent in my tape, and then they came out to California and met with me. And that meeting was awkward at first and then turned into being great, and I'm really great friends with all those people now. But the first question they asked me was, why do you think you'd be a good host for Antiques Roadshow? To which I answered, I have no idea. You called me. I think it's as crazy as you do. And then I basically said what is true. I said, look, you know, you've got all the greatest experts in the world. The last thing you need is another expert. You know, you need a curious observer, a curious student, which is what most audience members are. And that's the role I'd be happy to play. So then the next story goes, apparently, that there were some finalists and they were playing demo reels in the office and people were walking by. And when they were playing mine, I guess people stopped and watched. So I got the job.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So do you have background in radio then, or is it all television?
All TV. I was raised in South Carolina. My family was very involved in community theater, so I was always on stage and performing. When I was really young, I auditioned for a group called the Young Americans that tours all over the world now. And that brought me out to California. And so was doing that for a while, and that was great. But then when I got married, I needed to get a job. So I went to work at Dick Clark Productions just as a runner, you know, the lowest rung of the ladder. And my idea was really to learn television production because I didn't have a college degree, and I was kind of scrambling to figure out what I was going to do. And I didn't really think I had it to be an actor. So I liked show business so much that I wanted to be involved in some way. So I went into production and I started learning everything I could about TV production. And while doing that, we were on a taping for a show for Dick Clark, and we got to the studio and there was no warm-up guy for the audience.
Well, let me ask this. Is there always a warm-up person, so to somebody to get the audience ready to go?
Usually if you're in a studio show with an audience, because studio taping can be laborious, they usually hire a warm-up comedian to entertain the studio audience, keep them apprised of what's going on, get the reactions you want on the shows that have an audience that are on camera, you know, that kind of a role. So, yeah, it's a standard position and quite lucrative as a business for a lot of guys. I had never seen anybody do it, and I really had no frame of reference. So Dick Clark just pulled me aside and said, you know, you're that funny kid from The Office, so just go out there and ask some trivia questions, give away T-shirts. And he had no expectation. No one had any expectation, but I had years in front of audiences. So I just went out and created a relationship, which is, you know, my style of performance. And I never really thought of myself as a comedian, although I like to think sometimes I am comedic. But I'm an observer, and I know how to create relationship with audiences. So it went great. People were really like buzzing about how I did. And the next thing I knew, I was getting calls from other producers saying, can you call in sick and come do warm-up for me? And at the time, I was making something like $250 a week working in the office, and warm-up was paying several $100s a day. So I was like, yeah, I can do that. And then it wasn't long before that became my career. So I was a warm-up guy for several years.
That's pretty. So was Young Americans, was that an improv group, or what did you guys do?
So Young Americans is this nonprofit touring musical theater predominantly group of young kids from 18 to 22 years old, and it really is song and dance stuff. And I was in college, and they came through town doing a concert tour, and I auditioned after the concert, and got accepted for what they had at the time, which was this college credit summer stock program. And I went and did that, and they accepted me into the group. So I moved out to California, and I was, part of their touring group for a few years. So it really is an incredible training ground for not just performance arts, but tech information and, audio and lighting and the basic understanding of what it takes to work and produce anything. In addition to, the transformational aspect of what music can do for people who don't, enjoy that, don't have an outlet for that. So, it is a great experience for lots of people, and I'm still very much involved with them. But for me, it was a transition from South Carolina into my life that I had no idea was going to happen.
So it sounds like a lot of your stuff, Mark, just kind of, I don't know if you could say fell into your lap, but a lot of it is right place and saying yes.
Well, saying yes is the right answer. The right place is you're always in the right place. And I do a lot of speaking now, and one of the things I usually start with is if you want to make God laugh, make plans. That phrase is a little bit cliche, but it rings true for me in almost every aspect of my life, that opportunities show up and they rarely look like what you had planned them to be. And I haven't found that taking, measured steps in a plan to get to a result is as effective as just saying yes to whatever pops up in front. And so I was able to do that and was pretty supple about and pretty confident, maybe ignorant about what I could do. So when people would say, hey, this is an opportunity, I would say, sure. And I could tell you stories, be happy to tell you stories about things that I ended up doing that I certainly wasn't qualified to do, but pulled off. I staged the musical numbers for a 2-hour CBS primetime 4th of July special that I was not qualified to do. So, that's one story of things that happened that was like, how are you a choreographer on a primetime special right now when you don't even dance? But, I said yes. They were, it was a Dick Clark production, and at the time I had a staff position, and my job was to enter and log in invoices and get people paid. I mean, it was so not creative. But I was, in the producer's row working at my desk, and the director, Lou Horvitz, a huge Emmy award-winning director, was meeting with all these choreographers. He meets with Kenny Ortega and Paula Abdul, and I forgot who else, and it just wasn't working out. And every time he'd walk by my desk, I would joke with him and say, hey, I can do this. You need me, I can do this. And he'd laugh, and I'd laugh. And then one day, about a week out, he calls me in the office and says, look, if I tell you I want a marching band to hit the stage on this beat of the music, can you make that happen? I said, I'm your man. So the next thing I know, I'm in Philadelphia on the back steps of Independence Hall with Dick Clark standing next to me, who at this point I was still so low on the ladder that I still got pretty starstruck whenever I was in his presence. And I'm telling him what to do. And, I'm in a recording session with Frankie Avalon, and, I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing. So that's just one of a million examples of say yes and figure it out later that has paid off for me.
So do you lose a lot of sleep when somebody says, okay, hey, Mark, this is what you're doing. I need this to happen. You need to have somebody pop out of a cannon on this beat. Do you lose sleep when you try to figure that stuff out, or is it just kind of come to you?
No, the way I look at it is once you said yes and you're in, you go into survival mode. You just go past the fear and the second guessing and into action. And we're all better in action anyway. Once we've committed and there's no resistance, if I can get heady with you, then you just get down to getting it done, and you either do well or you don't. And in so many of these cases, as I've described, the people who have asked me to do jobs that I may or may not be qualified for were in a pickle, or they wouldn't have come out of their wheelhouse anyway to find somebody. So I always loved that because it's a panic situation for the people who've hired you. So either you're going to not do well and they would expect that because it was a gamble, or you're going to do moderately well and they're going to think you're a hero, or you're going to do great and you're going to be like, something miraculous. So I like the way the odds stack, and I bring my best self and I do my best work. And the truth is that, entertaining audiences, whether you're producing something for television or if you're doing a musical or if you're on radio or performance art, it all comes down to the same beats, you know? You just listen to what the crowd wants and you give it to them.
Is it hard to build the relationships that you do? Because it seems as though when I watched you do the Price is Right live, you make an instant friend with the person that's on stage with you. That's probably because they want to win, but there's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable doing that, and you make it look pretty easy.
Well, on the Price is Right live, it's even more difficult than anywhere else because in a normal game show on television, the contestants have been screened and they're rehearsed. You know, they know the game. They are selected because they're great, right? And they've got great energy. And so from a host standpoint, it's shooting fish in a barrel. On Price is Right live, they're randomly selected out of the audience. So that skill you're speaking of is really important. For me, it's a natural thing that I've had to break down to try to teach others the power of it. And for me, there are a couple tools I use. One is, and I'll try to say this and not be too California woo-woo about it, but it's about listening. Humans speak both individually and collectively, and rarely with words. So if you think about words as in communication, sort of like a fart joke. I'm laughing that I'm using this analogy. But when you do a joke about poop or fart or something like that, it'll always get a laugh, but it's the easiest laugh to get, and it's not particularly a good laugh. It's always there and easy. So speaking and hearing people speak, well, that's the default easiest way to communicate, but it's not the most effective way to communicate. So for me, as a host on stage, I listen to what's not being said. I listen to body language. I listen to the words they're saying, but why they chose those words. I observe, and from that, I'm able to speak into what the audience and the contestant is listening for, right? Because I'm listening to them. And that creates an immediate bond of safety with the person you're dealing with. I also, and this is sort of a tool, I feel like everybody, when you come on stage or you're in the situation that you're uncomfortable, everybody has sort of a bubble of safety around them, like a safe space. Like, you know, when you're at a party and people are close talkers and that makes you uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Well, we do this naturally. That's part of that communication I talked about. So as a host, and if you think about it now, you'll notice that every time I get a contestant, I put my arm around them, I hold their hand, I put my hand on their shoulder, even if it's a guy. And when I do that, I've broken that bubble of their own insecurity safety zone, and I've become their ally. So as I've got a hand on their back or on their elbow, or, you know, as you'll see, sometimes we're like in a full embrace the whole time, or I'm holding their hand, they relax. I can now sense what's going on with them, and it lets them know I've got them, because the last thing you want to be is an amateur on stage in front of 2,500 people, and no one's touching you or letting you know where you are, and you're concerned that you're doing the wrong thing.
Did somebody teach you that?
No, it's just something I discovered and was doing naturally that seemed to work. And as people started asking me questions, I then had to ask those questions of myself to see what is it I'm actually doing. I learned a lot of my hosting style and my technique as far as how to do TV by watching Dick Clark. He was a genius. And I've watched a lot of hosts, and I've seen a lot of what to do and what not to do, because as a warm-up guy, you're doing a million pilots of talk shows and game shows with hosts who may never make it to the air. And that's a really great training ground to watch. But Dick Clark was one of the, obviously one of the greatest pros ever. And I learned a lot from him. However, the stuff you're talking about, which is that connection to the contestant, and he taught me how to connect through the camera. He had a way of talking to the camera like he's talking to one person. And he became sort of the older brother, father, uncle guy that you trusted. And I learned a lot of how to communicate through the camera with him. The live audience stuff I may have been better at than he was. And we've talked about it. But that was some stuff that I did naturally that I then later broke down and figured out what it is, and learned from others as well.
So do a lot of younger guys come up to you and say, hey, Mark, how do I do this? Or what can I do to get the audience eating out of my hands as you did?
Well, more now, but, television and production and show business is like an old trade guild. You know, when you were back, hundreds of years ago and you wanted to, be a plumber, you would go live with a plumber and you'd be an apprentice and you'd learn from him, right? And what I like about show business is it's not particularly what you learn in school that gets you where you're going. It's who you apprentice under. So as I was a warm-up guy, which was the start of my, let's just say, switch from production to talent, although warm-up guy is a sort of suspect area that's neither talent nor production. But when I started to go there, I was the new kid, and I was taking any job I could, so there were people in front of me that were throwing me the jobs they weren't taking. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That sort of apprenticeship, and giving me some pointers. And then I remember there was a camera assist guy who was really funny who wanted to do warm-up. And I said, all right, he'd watch me. And I said, I'll throw you some of the jobs that I can't do. And I'll give you carte blanche to use any of my material that you've heard me say, since I probably stole it from somebody else, until you can figure out your own voice. So then as I started hosting my own shows, he started being a warm-up guy and had a nice run as a career. Another guy, similar story, is George Gray. And this is a great example of how building team is everything in every business, but in show business is a necessity. I was a warm-up guy on a big hit game show at Fox. It was taping at Fox. It was syndicated, called Studs. It was a dating show. And at the time, it was the show to be a part of. And on the lot that you wanted to be at, because In Living Color was going crazy, and that was one studio over. So Jamie Foxx and Jim Carrey and all these people, it was really an exciting time. But the line producer came to me and said, there's this kid who is a stand-up, and he wants to get into doing warm-up, and I really like him, and would you mind if he came and watched you? Well, the story goes that they'd asked several warm-up people, and they all said no, because at the time, when you're a warm-up guy, it was such a small business. It was very proprietary, and nobody wanted anybody stealing their stuff. But I didn't have any stuff, because my way of doing it was just to relate to people. And, I've stumbled upon some jokes I reused, but it really wasn't contingent upon an act. So I said, sure. So George Gray was the kid, and he came and watched me a few times. And then as I started to get to know him, I started throwing him some jobs. And then I got my own talk show. So at that point, anything I had that were ongoing series, I moved to New York to do my talk show. I kind of dumped him over to George, and he became top dollar warm-up guy in town. At this point, I was one of the top warm-up guys in town. So I went to my talk show. My talk show got canceled. I came back to L.A. I could not get arrested. I was going broke. And George was taken off because he started to get on camera. So he got the daytime version of Weakest Link and was going to be, pretty much transitioning to an on-camera thing. So, while it was a little bit of humble pie, I came back going, I'm in trouble. And so he said, I can help you. So he gave me Win Ben Stein's Money, and I was the warm-up guy on that, and then some other show. So that's how it works. You build a team of people who are supporting you, and we throw each other work and support each other through it. And now I've got a career, and George is the announcer on The Price is Right, and all is well.
That's pretty cool. What kind of goes around comes around. I got to ask this though, because I know that you're a poker player, and
yes.
has your ability to read people kind of helped you with the whole poker thing? Before I ask that question, let me start with this. How did you start playing poker?
Well, everything goes through the filter of show business, I guess. I got invited many, many years ago down to the LA Poker Classic. This was right at the height of when the World Poker Tour just took that little camera and put it on the table, and now the home audience could see the poker card, and the poker boom started, right? Uh-huh. So right at the height of the poker boom, they were having a series of tournaments at the Commerce Casino, and the opening tournament was huge, and they invited a bunch of celebrities to come down and play. Free buy-in, and you get to play. So there's almost a celebrity at every table. And they were, at this point, from Tobey Maguire down to me. It was all kinds of people. And so they brought us in on a Sunday for like a tutorial. It was the first time I ever played Hold'em. And we sat around and played, and they taught us the basics of the game. And then the tournament started, and I played, and I lasted about an hour, and then I was out. I had no idea what I was doing. And then from that, they invited me to play on a celebrity Hollywood home game, I think it was called. So I played at this table on TV, really having no idea what I was doing. Antonio Esfandiari and Phil Locke were there, and I really had no idea. And I played terribly, and I lost pretty quickly. After that, I got The Price is Right live in Atlantic City. And I was so frustrated by that experience that was going to air on TV that I read a couple books. I was right next to the Taj Mahal at the time, and I went and played poker every day. Read books and played poker, and I was still horrible. But and the horrible thing is, while I was playing in the poker room, the episode that I had taped aired where I played horribly, and the whole poker room just kind of booed me. So that was humbling. So I kind of dedicated it as a game guy. I like crosswords and logic puzzles and Sudoku, and this to me was the ultimate game. So I started studying the game, and in the past 3 or 4 years, I've been playing regularly. And I think it's a really beautiful game, that I'm enjoying learning.
So did the people that booed you know that you were actually there, or did they boo because you were a poor player?
It was a loving boo. They knew me because at the time they recognized me, but it was sort of like, oh, Mark, what are you thinking? You're all in with ace-4? And they were right.
Right. So now let's go back to that question that I asked earlier. Has your skill of reading people and making them comfortable helped you in the game of poker?
I think there's to some degree that helps me because I'm not as much of a mathematical player as the bigger pros are, although I'm learning to do that. So I fill that void. I get the basic idea where we are mathematically, and then sort of the table profiling that players do. You know how you kind of track, this guy plays tight, this guy plays loose, this woman, tends to always follow through with a continuation bet or whatever those things are. That's where it falls into more of my intuition more than tracking. So I kind of am able to do that listening thing I talked about to profile the other players. But as far as like picking up tells and stuff, I'm going to say right now, I'm several years into playing semi-professionally, and I don't look for tells. I don't use a tell. I think they are just as dangerous as they are helpful. You think you pick up a tell and then you make a bet or a play based on the tell and you are wrong, then you really have defied the mathematics of things. But I guess there is some listening and intuition I use that reflects back to what I spoke about that is helpful in the game, for sure.
Are you a bluffer?
Well, see, now there's something that as I've learned to play poker, I don't even like the term anymore.
You don't like
I look at it this way.
You don't like to what anymore?
I don't like the term bluff.
Oh, okay.
Because to the non-poker player, bluffing sounds like you're just arbitrarily picking a moment to lie and see if you can get somebody to believe you, right? And if they do, then it's that moment on TV where you're, oh, look, I had, deuce 7 offsuit and I won because I lied, I look at bluffing differently. I look at every hand as situational, okay? Especially, and let's caveat this whole conversation and say I'm speaking predominantly in tournament poker, which is entirely different than cash game poker, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That the mindset of cash game poker is not the same as tournament poker. And in tournament poker, an all-in could mean your tournament life, so it has the weight it should have. That's the most poetic poker play is tournament poker, because you can't reload your chips. So that said, in tournament poker, there are 3 elements. There's chips, there's position, and there's cards. And the cards are a added bonus, but chips and position are a lot more important than what cards you have. As a matter of fact, my philosophy is to play the game so that the cards become so that the luck of the cards is at least minimized, if not eliminated. So the reason I don't really love the term bluff is that it's a situational presentation. So most of my bluffs, that would be by the numbers of bluff, would be what you would call a semi-bluff in the real poker world, because I might have had a starting hand or a speculative hand that I opened with, and maybe I opened with that hand because of my position in chips, right? So, for instance, if I'm short stacked or mid stacked and I'm in early position and I get some suited connectors like 7-8 suit, that's not really a good starting hand in first, second, or third position, right? But if I'm chipped up and I'm in the back end, in other words, I'm late position, and there's not a lot of action in front of me, then that's a hand I might start with. So there, first of all, is I'm in the hand with something that may not have been premium. Then, based on my position in chip stack and betting, the flop comes. Often, I can have a hand that's a pretty legitimate hand, but when the flop comes, it's racked. But now that's the part where I'm not playing particularly the cards I have. I'm playing the position and the story that's being told by all the players involved. So it may dictate that I'm going to lead out with a raise to represent something I don't have, and then it suddenly is a bluff now, isn't it? But it's not me deciding to bluff. It's that the situation presented itself, and the way to win this hand is to present what the story tells.
What do you mean by story?
Pre-flop, there's action, and it starts to the left of the button and goes around.
Uh-huh.
So the story is, did anybody limp in? Did they raise? Did they check? Did they fold, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the action that happens after that. Was there a raise and a call, and what happened there? So the story's unfolding. Now the flop comes, and cards are there, and now you have to run everything that's happened through the filter of what's the story and does it add up. So maybe at this point of the game, you've kind of gotten a handle on what starting hands are for the player, or the range of starting hands that the players who are in the hand may be playing. So you can kind of guess, well, he's probably going to have either mid or high pair, or he's going to play premium hands, or he could be in with anything. And then when the flop comes, based on the reaction to the flop, the story continues to be told. Now, if I let out with a speculative hand, in other words, if the blinds were 100, 200, and I come in with a $600 raise in late position, and I get two callers who are speculative, right? I don't know what they have, but I put them on a range of, maybe they got a good ace, or maybe they got a pair or whatever. Mm-hmm. And now the flop comes, and the story adds up that would have hit me, right? Even though it didn't, then I might have to come out with another raise here. I might have to lead out with a bet. And if I lead out with a bet, I'm going to learn one or two things. I'm going to either learn that the other people weren't, they hit, or they have something great. So that bet size I have to consider so I don't hurt myself. Or they're going to fold because they have to put me on a pretty decent hand. In other words, it often happens where you'll bet out with something like 10 jack, and the flop will come ace, rag. But if I'm first to act, I might raise again so that they go, well, I think he had the ace. That would have been a good starting hand for me. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's a bluff, but it's dictated by the situation, not because I decided I think I can get one over on these people.
That actually makes sense. So does a bad card player ruin the story, if you will?
Yeah, the bad card player is the variable that ultimately, certainly in a cash game, can mean a lot of money for good players, but in the tournament game can really be a horrible thing, because a bad card player is playing luck. So bad card player, will bet into a raise with a flush draw, or a gut shot straight, or a weak pair, or whatever, and they get lucky. And when they get lucky, and that's what I'm talking about, luck doesn't really care if you're a good player or a bad player. Luck is just luck. So bad players will stay in hands they should have put the story together to get out of, right? Mm-hmm. And because they don't know enough to see what's happening, they'll play anyway, and sometimes they hit.
Do your buddies want to play cards with you anymore after
Well,
Celebrity Mark is now a baller, if you will, a carder?
Well, what's funny is I have a group of old friends that we used to play nickel dime mixed game, not real poker, wild cards and stuff.
Right.
And I still play with them. We get together every few months or so, and we play, and it's fun, and it's no big money. But if they ever want to do a round of Hold'em, it becomes pretty funny. Sometimes I'll play around and I won't look at my cards, and I'll just play blind.
Are they like Mark, you're an ass?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And in that game, I do a lot of smack talk. So yeah, that's a little bit of showing off. But I must then add that in the world of poker, I'm way down the level of play. I'm not anywhere near the big pro level, but I'm learning.
Right.
I'm learning.
Are you intimidated ever?
No, I so much posturing happens at a poker table, and attempts to intimidate and talk, and I laugh at that because card to card, situations are situations, and it's only a game of poker, so I don't really get intimidated. I always feel like I know more than the guys next to me, so I mean, there are times when I'm playing at a table and I realize that I might be a little bit outmatched, and then it's just about learning. But you really have to know your game. You really can't get in the head of what people think of you, because you start making bad choices. So I sit real quiet, watch what's going on. Sometimes I'm doing a crossword puzzle while I'm playing the game, and because it's slow game and you're there for hours, and I don't engage in any sort of vendetta kind of conversation. I don't try to bully. I just wait for my time, take my spots.
Do you think that you intimidate people because of your celebrity?
I always laugh that there's a point in the game where someone recognizes me. I can go hours with nobody paying attention because I'm pretty low key at the table. And then once somebody starts talking about the game, about show business, it takes me out of my game a little bit. And then there is, like, if I'm traveling and I'm playing in a local, some local casino or something, and I get recognized, then there is a little bit of, I took a pot off of that guy. So I'll get calls on things I wouldn't normally get because the novelty. It's the same thing I would do if I was playing against a pro. I might bet into them just to see if I can pull a pot, so I can say I took one off of Antonio Esfandiari or something. But I don't think that's really too much of a factor. The only thing is that I don't particularly. I go to play poker to forget about work. I don't particularly want to sit and talk about my career while I'm at the poker table. But that rarely happens.
Do you think of yourself as a celebrity, Mark?
Not at all. My wife and I have this argument all the time. I live in Sherman Oaks, California, a suburb of Hollywood. Everybody's a celebrity. So it's relative. Here I can go my whole day and nobody says a word, but my wife always reminds me that, I get recognized all the time and people know who I am, and I am a celebrity, and I'm like, I'm not on the scale of what real celebrity is. I'm just grateful that those people who do recognize me come up and say hello, that my level of notoriety is not so much that it impacts my life in a negative manner. At my level, anyone who says hello to me or asks for an autograph or a picture is just a lovely distraction and a lovely, chat and a moment to say hello. And I really can't describe it as what those outside the business would project at what it is to be a celebrity. I work like anybody else, and then my life is pretty much like everybody else's, except I have a lot of free time.
Do you ever get starstruck when you meet somebody?
Years ago I had a couple opportunities to do shows like Access Hollywood and Extra and the Golden Globes and things like that. And I used to say, I'll do it, but I hate talking to celebrities. And to my demise, I lost some jobs that I should have taken, back in the day. It's not that I get starstruck. There are a couple that I'm sure I would get starstruck by. It's not that I get starstruck so much by celebrities, but I'm not as interested in talking to celebrities. It's just not as interesting to me. Regular people are far more interesting to me, and the plugging whatever movie you're doing and talking about, your workout regimen or what clothes you're wearing is not as interesting to me. So those celebrities who are engaged in something outside of that, I find really fascinating. I like, the celebrities I've met have big personalities, so they're great people to get to know anyway because there's something that made them a celebrity. But talking about the business is not particularly my lane.
I just want to say that, you and I, we met face to face, and I've met a lot of celebrities just through my job as a radio personality. And a lot of the people that I've met, I mean, I hate to say this if anybody is ever listening, but some of them are assholes. And you've probably run into that as well through your career. And unless you're BSing me, when we sat down, had a beer, BS'd after a show, you seem like just a super down to earth guy. I mean, you gave me your home telephone number, for crying out loud. And
well, look, I'm glad that that's the impression you got. I'm sure I'm as much of an asshole as anybody. The reason that celebrities often come off as assholes is that there's it's like politics. There's a certain profile that wants that limelight, and it's relatively narcissistic. So when you get those people one-on-one, oftentimes that narcissism shows up as somebody that's kind of an asshole. For me, I still have that gene, and my wife would certainly attest to me being a jerk a lot. But I have worked in a different part of show business. I'm not an actor. I'm not a music artist. I'm a host, which is really facilitating other people's work. And I've had ups and downs, and that really keeps you humble. So basically, I'm like a lot of people. I'm married to my wife, who I love. I'm raising my kids. I'm trying to get through each day and making decisions over the years of what school they're going to go to and how do I pay for insurance and all the same stuff. And my job happens to be one that people sharing because they see me. But what's interesting is what gets projected on that is that, if I'm on Antiques Roadshow, I'm making millions of dollars a year and I'm living in these private jets and whatever. But the truth is that's a PBS show and I'm still grinding out a living like the rest of the guys. I'm not going to sit and cry poor mouth. I do live a pretty idyllic life. But, it's, for me, the performing, like the entertaining of an audience is a joy. That's what I'm driven to do. That's what keeps me here. Everything that goes along with it is really about, providing for my family. And, that's why a lot of times I like to produce, because it gives you a creative payoff, because it's not just you being charming and saying something cool and having good hair. It's creating something that matters, and you don't have to shave, and it's not about you. So, I kind of, I grew up in South Carolina. I did not come from wealth. I really didn't have this drive to be a star. It wasn't about that. I loved entertaining. And so it's been sort of a blue collar approach to show business, I guess. I just don't get too heady about it, man. As soon as I get heady and I have a huge success, and then the show gets canceled and you're back to, looking for a job, then you stay pretty humble. And now I'm looking at my wife who's coming to give me a kiss, and the reason I've tried to stay humble all these years. There's no way you can make it through the business I made it through if your wife doesn't support you 100%, because it would suck to be on the other end of this.
Let's wrap it up with that. You live in Sherman Oaks. You've been married for a long time. You've got 2 great kids.
30 years. Yeah.
How do you attribute being in Hollywood, being a guy doing showbiz for a living, and making a marriage work?
Well, first of all, like I said, I'd like to tell you that it's stuff I did, but truthfully, it's more about my wife and what she has done. My wife came from a show business family. So this freelance life of not knowing what you're doing 13 weeks ahead of you freaks out most people. But my wife comes from a place of never knowing what the next job was anyway, so she understands. One of the things about a marriage and a show business marriage is that if you guys don't support each other, you can't trust anything else to be written in stone. Everything's written in Jello. So you got to know that you guys are in it for the right reasons. My wife supports me through it all because she gets it. And she has this really huge spiritual take on things, that there's plenty of everything and God always provides. So just keep doing your thing and we'll get through the dark times and we'll enjoy the good times. But, outside of that, as you're managing a family, because I have 2 children who are now grown and out of the house, show business was how I made my living. But the reason I made my living was to raise 2 great kids and to support my beautiful wife and that kind of stuff. So ironically, well, not ironically, but consequently, neither of my children are really bitten by the show business bug, although my daughter is technically in show business. That was not the overwhelming, I'm going to follow in Dad's footsteps, look at all this great, celebrity stuff. My son's a Navy pilot. It's an entirely different calling. And my daughter's a professional ballerina, which is more art than it is show business. So, I just stayed grounded. My wife has always reminded me what's real. The business has a very good way of keeping you humble. As soon as you start believing your own hype, you lose your job and you can't figure out how to pay your rent. So if you don't get your head on straight and you don't have a support group, you're not going to survive. And that's why you see so many stories of people in show business, just screwing it up so badly.
Awesome conversation, Mark. I appreciate it. How does somebody find out more information about you, or if they have any, questions about poker, or I know that you're writing a book, if they want to find that book that you, once that book is written, how do they reach out to you?
Well, my website is marklwalberg.net. There's no H in Walberg. And that's probably the easiest way to find me. I have a Facebook fan page. You can always follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. The BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer.
Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com.
This has been another podcastforhire.com production.